Speaking of what is on the top of mind for learning and development professionals, that is part of what we are here to talk about. And so let's get into our presentation for today. Okay. Just a couple of housekeeping things. If you can't already tell, I want this to be an interactive, open discussion session. I do have some slides to cover, and since we are a decently sized group, I would ask that if you are not openly talking or making a comment, keep yourself on mute, please. As much as we would love to hear your kids, your dogs, the clicking of your fingers as you are answering that last text, we want to just make sure the rest of the group can hear. Of course, if you have a comment or a question, I am monitoring the chat. You can also unmute yourself. We are a pretty close-knit community here in the Bay Area, and even if you are new to this session or new to this group, we would love to get to know you more. I have peppered in a couple of prompting questions and other activities to help us have open discussion. And then towards the end, I'll leave some room if you want to continue to network and just get to know your peers here. So in our agenda today, we're going to cover three different areas. What's going on in the learning and development industry as a whole, or I should say, what's going on in the world as it relates to learning and development. Then we're going to talk about what's going on with the chapter ATD Golden Gate. What are we doing? What have we been doing? And what happens next? Where do we go from here? So the first question I had as I was going through the research is, what is keeping leaders up at night? Because as L&D professionals, we serve business leaders in addition to the employees that work for them or work with them. And I was reading a research study. This comes from the 2022 Gartner HR Priorities Survey. And the top 5 priorities for human resources leaders in 2022 were, number 1 was building critical skills and competencies. Should come as no surprise. It's all about increasing the capacity of the staff who are on site. We've been reading trends about quiet quitting or the great resignation, especially here in the tech world. We've been reading about major layoffs. And so HR professionals are focused on how do we upskill the people that we have, right? Second priority is around organizational design and change. And for this, it's about organizing the business to be able to adjust to the changes that came as a result of the pandemic. So now that we're in this quasi post-COVID, is COVID really over world, organizations are dealing with new trending topics such as hybrid environments, working remotely. How do you maintain employee engagement and allow for remote work and flexibility, combating burnout, et cetera? And so this is top of mind for a lot of HR leaders. The third, when we look at current and future leadership bench, this is also tied to upskilling. Training middle managers. Managers are at a critical level in the organization in that they get squeezed between the strategic plans of upper management and the day-to-day needs of the frontline staff. And so in the survey that was done by Gartner, HR leaders said that they honestly didn't feel like they effectively trained their mid-level managers. And I'm speaking anecdotally from my own organization's experience. COVID-19 really put it in the forefront for us of how much training our middle managers really needed in order to help their staff navigate the uncertainties and the changing times. I'm going to pause there. Any questions or comments about what I've said so far? Just want to make sure.
I have a comment.
Yes.
I am starting a project. I have been working for 1.5 years on a project to integrate conscious capitalism with strategic planning. And I just saw today an incredible slide that says the future of strategic planning is leadership and culture.
Mm-hmm.
That so HR and training people, think of your strategic planning people as allies, because they can no longer just work with systems and process, the head part. They also are, they need heart and soul.
Mm-hmm.
They need engagement of people, and they do feel, so the middle manager feels like they're squeezed because the strategic plan does not necessarily call for anything else other than the tough metrics of how much have you done for me lately, as opposed to the things like engagement, culture survey, how well are we doing, 360s, et cetera.
Yeah.
So this is right on, Kalinga.
Yeah. Well, and from a learning and development standpoint, we have to think about the impact of our learning activities, because I think to that same note, Chris, when we build our trainings, there's a lot of organic learning that happens when you can get together in person with people. I know we've talked about it as a chapter about the organic nature of networking and just being able to learn with that water fountain talk. But when you're in a virtual environment like this, it has to be intentional. We have to adjust and change how we disseminate information, because it may not stick as well as when we were doing it in person. And a lot of us had a crash course in that in 2020. And so hopefully now in 2023, we've gotten our bearings. Maybe we took some extra classes. We'll talk about that as the presentation goes on. But to summarize what I'm hearing from you, Chris, is how much we underestimated the importance of leadership and culture when it comes to keeping people engaged with an organization, and how that's coming up now post-pandemic. Yeah, great. And continuing on, the fourth priority here is the future of work, which when I say future of work, it's kind of connected to the organizational design and change. Companies are focused on structuring an organization that can either maintain or increase its productivity, but acknowledges current working trends like remote work, the increased need for soft skills or transferable skills, better emergency business planning. And so HR professionals are thinking about, how are we designing our organization to be sustainable 5 or 10 years from now, as opposed to just focusing on how we're structured today. And then the last priority, not the last, but the number 5 priority, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. The events that happened in 2020 definitely brought it to the forefront for a lot of people, but also a lot of organizations. How are we providing an inclusive and a sense of belonging, not just hiring people like a cog to do a job like in a machine, but how do we have them feel a sense of belonging with the organization? And actually, Jesse, I see your comment in the chat. The interesting conundrum is the culture and leadership of the organization versus recruiting for someone who is authentic. What about the culture match? Is it even considered? Yeah, I think that all of these priorities we see here denote that hopefully organizations are looking at their recruitment practices, especially for their leadership recruitment, and saying, do you match kind of the culture that we need to foster in this organization, as opposed to, are you just an expert at the task or the job that we need you to do?
Another term I've heard a lot recently, just from even my company's talent acquisition team. Of course, it's, we're looking for good humans, good people, and there's some like deep values that, we want people to be able to align with and share. But the term culture fit, I think, can be misunderstood. So a lot of people are now using culture add, who can add to our existing culture. So it helps us bring in new perspectives and avoid that whole trap of trying to hire people who just are a lot like us already.
Yeah. And I go back to that trend of upskilling and looking for people who can exhibit those soft skills, or those, Seth Godin, the author, said they should really call them the real skills, because they're the skills that help the company move effectively. But sometimes it's not just about, does the person have the level of degree or the number of years and all those kind of traditional metrics for whether or not they're a good candidate. It's also about seeing their potential to be great leaders and their potential to exhibit those transferable skills. So now I'm going to ask you all to take a poll, looking at these 5 things, which I'll repeat: building those critical soft skills and competencies, redesigning the organization for better change management, preparing the leadership pipeline, future of work, DEI. Which of those would you say is your top priority in your line of work, whether you work for an organization or you're self-employed, or it's just the top priority for you? I'm launched a poll, and I want to see, I'm sure many of you are like, all of them are a priority, but which is a top priority for you? And Colleen, I do see your comment. We will do that as soon as we are done with this poll. All right. Going to give you guys a little bit more time to respond. Okay, just another couple seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll. Interesting. Okay, so I went ahead and shared the results. It looks like pretty even across the board, with organizational design and change management and future of work and building critical skills kind of being in the lead. Good. Like I said, this is just a snapshot poll. It doesn't mean that these other things are not your priority. I was just curious to see the room. But Carla, I wanted to ask, per Colleen's comment, if you wouldn't mind elaborating more on your question about trust.
I think trust is fundamental to everything we're talking about. Really, it's how do you lead? How do you lead a change effort? How do you deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion? All of those things are about trust. Building trust, I think it starts with the leadership to create that environment if you can. And I think it's sorely lacking in a lot of organizations. It has to do with organizations thinking about more than just the bottom line and the well-being of their employees. Modeling trust, modeling trustworthiness by the leadership and all the way down the chain. And I just think it's fundamental and nobody's talking about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I had read a study, or it was a meta-analytic study, which is basically a study of other studies. And it talked about how a significant portion of people's trust in their leadership team really banked on 2 main factors, according to this study. I'm sure there are a lot. But the first was, are people getting clear expectations about what's expected of them? Do they have clarity on the goal, on the skill level they're supposed to have? And then the second was on the feeling of being treated fairly. So, for example, if someone is getting promoted, do I feel like that was fair, like their promotion was merited, or do I feel like maybe there's some shenanigans going on? Mm-hmm. Whether or not shenanigans are actually happening is irrelevant. It's all about how the employee receives it and how they feel about it. And so I think that's a great point, Carla, about, for each of these priorities, that undertone of do people have trust in the leadership team? Because if the answer is no, then in any of these, whether you're redesigning your organization, whether you're incorporating more leadership training, it doesn't solve the fundamental problem of people just don't see you as a trustworthy, stable source of leadership. And so I think that's why the undertone of those 5 priorities, which I'll post them just so you can see what I'm looking at, the undertone here is building people's trust that they can follow our leadership during uncertain times and that we'll have their back. Great comments. Anything else that came up for you while I was showing these? Not just you, Carla,
Yeah,
the whole group.
everybody.
Everybody. All right, so let's talk about, in addition to these top 5 priorities, there's the realization that buying talent is getting harder. We talk high level about the Great Resignation, about how the leverage is tilting towards employees. But let's also look at this graph. So in this graph, it talks about, it represents basically a pool of candidates for a software engineering role. We're in the tech world, software engineers. Yeah. And what it's illustrating is that in total, let's say we started with 139,000 candidates, but then as soon as you add kind of those typical parameters in a resume, 3 years of experience, and then for software engineers, there are certain languages that they need to learn. As soon as you add more of those on, you've already decreased your pool significantly. Now, these are numbers, I do have links to the actual surveys themselves, which are included in the slides. If you want, I can share them with you. But the point is that if we're already setting ourselves as an organization at a disadvantage, how can we even begin to work on these other things if we're not even increasing the pool of people who can come through the door? And I am looking at the chat. Chris, I see your comment. Lena, I saw your comment. And Jesse. Yeah, it would be interesting if these top priorities were presented to C-suite, for sure. All right, so we already did the poll where you picked your top priority. And I just want you to, I can't see all of you, but if you could raise your hand if you remember which priority you picked. Do you remember? Okay, generally idea. All right. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to give you guys a chance to kind of talk with each other about the priority that you picked. And it's going to be the same groups as last time, so you don't have to worry about introductions again. But why did you pick that priority? And what is your organization doing about it at this time? And I'm going to give you more time, don't worry, to talk about it. And I'm going to put the question in the chat. Okay, so this is your chat question. For the priority that you picked of those top 5, why did you pick it? And what is your organization, or what, if you're retired, what did your organization do in order to try and combat this? Okay, I'm going to give you about 10 minutes. Actually, I'm going to give you I'll give you 11 minutes, give you time to actually get over there. Any questions before I break you out? No, pretty straightforward. Question is in the chat. If you get to your room and you completely forget what happened, just click the question mark and I will come help you. See you in 11 minutes. Hey, well, welcome back. Let's talk about what you guys heard. So this time I'd like to hear, if you are willing, I'd like to hear from Tina, Colleen, and Lena. So Tina, Colleen, and Lena, what came up in your groups?
Well, so in our group, the majority of us had picked number 2, and then we had one person that picked number 1. So it was really cool to hear the different opinions. But I think as a group, we kind of all agreed on the same thing, that communication, change management, training is super important. And if you don't have that, it just doesn't work, right? So we didn't have any heated debates. We all were on the same page. And it was actually a great discussion. And it was good to hear from other people in other areas.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Tina.
You're welcome.
Colleen, what came up in your group?
We shared what we had selected, and two of us had selected number one, building critical skills and competencies. One had chosen leadership bench, and one other for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I will share. Oh, sorry. Did Tina have something else to add?
No.
So I will share that actually I was probably the solo person in this whole group that chose DEI. But what we really kind of came down to was, I think we came to an agreement that, everything is so interrelated, much like we talked about trust too, being so interrelated to everything. And honestly, all these elements that came in as the top 5 priorities, I think that they all go hand in hand in so many ways. And I think that we all agreed on that as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Colleen. All right, Lena, what came up in your group?
So it was myself, Bruce, Leah, and Lenka. And so Lenka and I both selected number 1, and Bruce and Leah selected number 4, future of work. And so I think both Lenka and I work in an environment where we're needing to fill those critical skill sets. Mm-hmm. And then Leah's currently in transition, and then was why her selection, like what is the future of work? So she's still kind of doing her research. And then with Bruce, like, he does avatars, right? Something that's engaging. And so I was sharing with him, I really can hear him say he really wants to bring the fun and the different and the engaging. And so, and especially in hybrid, and I think in that environment, we do need to keep that at the forefront. So it was very robust conversation, if I can add that. So.
Thank you, Lena. I'm glad that there were a lot of kind of common fundamental values that came out in those discussions. And also the takeaway that a lot of these things are interconnected. Like, yes, we categorize them because it's easy to visualize and it's easier to talk about. But in the reality of work, each of us is trying to build trust, build relationships as a way to increase the effectiveness with hitting our goals or hitting the impact that we want. So really good stuff. Thank you all. All right, so we talked about HR leaders, what's top of mind for them. Now let's transition to talk about us specifically. What's happened when it comes to learning and development, and in particular training in 2022? Let's see what happened here. Well, in the US, we spent more. $100 billion-ish to be exact. So the key drivers for the higher spend were things such as higher investment in virtual learning technology, no big surprise there. And then during this post-COVID time, we've been transitioning back to in-person training. So companies have been investing in the virtual software platforms, but then also, once again, paying for travel and flying people in. I know my organization, we flew in a trainer from New York for a DEI training. Inflation, which has affected pretty much everything, but especially the cost of staff, the cost of travel, the cost of food at the grocery store. So that's also the reason for the increase. And larger companies, meaning companies who have 10,000 or more employees, increased their budgets. And the source for this study was the Training Magazine. Raise your hand if you read or have read ever Training Magazine. Anyone? No? Okay.
All the time and every month.
All the time and every month. And so, fun fact, which I did not know this before this year, full transparency. They publish an industry report pretty much every year. They have for a couple of decades now. And so if you are just looking to stay up to date on training industry trends yourself, Training Magazine, check them out. Good resource. So our spending went up. Training expenses per learner went up significantly. If we look at the bottom of this graph for large companies, 10,000 or more employees. So these bars represent year over year spending per learner for everything from small to large companies. As you can see, for smaller companies, the spending went down. Mid-size, it went up and then went down a little bit, but large companies are definitely spending more. in case you are wondering why that is, I'm afraid I do not have that information. I don't believe the study talked about why, or did they? Some of the factors that go into spending per learner is the payroll for the staff has gone up. Companies have been hiring more training staff or staff focused on training. I actually spoke with an organization based in Australia 2 days ago who was asking me for tips on learning management systems. And they said that their team had been built over the past 6 months. They had grown from 1 person to a team of about 3 to 4 people supporting a large organization. And then, of course, the annual spending on vendors, products and services, technologies, content, etc., goes into that. But here's the surprising thing, or at least I found it surprising. Even though we increased our budget in the US overall, and large companies increased the amount of money they spent per learner, the hours of training per employee decreased. And especially if we look at the bottom of this chart, it decreased significantly for the larger companies in this study. Only mid-sized companies in the survey saw an increase in hours of training per employee in 2022. So the study I was reading didn't elaborate too much on why, but I wonder if some of you may have some thoughts or hypotheses as to why that may be.
I have some thoughts or hypotheses, but I don't know if they relate to this. One of the things that I noticed, and I've been doing other things, working with Bruce and doing some 3D stuff for the last 1.5 years. So, but during COVID and before, I was working on, contract basis, and I'd get recruiters who'd call me and I'd go in for a contract. And my own perception, and this may be just coincidental of places I went and where I worked, it may not be across the board, but I felt like there was much less emphasis on what I consider to be quality training that really sticks, training that really changes behavior. It was more checking off the box, doing the routine, saying you trained, but they didn't, it's very rare to have companies really measure the impact of training. Do you really do a before and after? Do you really see changes in productivity or turnover or any of the things that really are what you're trying to train people so they stay longer, they do better work, they feel happier, all of this stuff. They never really do feed real surveys to figure out, did it make a difference? And there seemed to me to be more emphasis in a lot of companies on the look and feel of training, but quality is hard to measure, and it's like they just gave up. And my concern from an industry perspective is a loss of influence and status by training professionals, because nobody really knows how to assess whether they're really providing value. And so it became more and more fit the template, do this, just do the routine. And more with the e-learning, nobody was doing a lot of face-to-face for a while, but that's a real concern to me. So of what's going on that I think has to do with the stature of the profession, with the influence that people in the profession, which has always been iffy, but has had some role for some time, but seems to be declining. So I'm putting that out there. I think this is the place to discuss it.
Yeah. Okay. So just to summarize, your hypothesis is there's a less of an emphasis on quality training, and that one reason why larger companies may be declining in the number of hours is because the focus has been more on, let's just check a box that says that we trained them or we put this in front of their eyes, as opposed to the deeper analysis and assessment.
Well, that's one possible interpretation. So it could be
one possibility. Yeah. Jessica, I saw you had a question about how they define training. Would you mind elaborating on that?
Yeah, I'm just typing. Give me a second.
Okay.
It'll make it easier. Yeah, because what does training mean? Does it mean skills training, you know, were you teaching people how to put square widgets into rectangular holes, or were you teaching people how to be managers? And that's very different. And what I just wrote after that is, what about learning? Because you can train until the cows come home, if that's a sentence anybody still understands. But if nobody learns anything, it's all gone down the drain. So what does it actually mean to say hours of training?
And
I don't know where it's appropriate, or if it's here, it might be. But what strikes me, and you know, I'm always the oldest one in the room, so what can I say? I've been reading Training. I don't anymore, but I used to read Training Magazine monthly from like the 80s. Nothing's changed in the sense that if you're not connected to the whole organization and figuring out what's needed to be learned to do what the organization needs, then what are you training? And how are you getting your budget if the boardroom doesn't know what you're doing? And why should they care? They get to tick a box. So it's that whole conundrum. And it's just very sad to me that in 40 years, I guess, a lot of things have changed. We're now doing much more e-learning, which actually did start in the 80s, I have to tell you, but very little of it. But what we're doing and how it affects the culture and the future goals of the organization, not necessarily the bottom line, but what they're trying to accomplish, I don't think that's changed. And it's not all that positive in the bigger organizations. And maybe that's good to see that the mid-sized organizations are doing more, but it depends on how it's defined.
Yeah, well, I think too, thank you, Jessica, for elaborating on your comments.
I'm just blabbing, I don't know.
But I think to yours and Carla's point, and Colleen, I do see your question in the chat. But to summarize what I'm hearing between Jessica and Carla, the one thing we cannot glean from these graphs is the quality or the impact of said training. This is just showing the facts of here's how much they spent, here's how many hours they spent. Right. But take this information as data that you can sink in, not you specifically, Jessica, but for those of you who are working in organizations, taking this to show to your leaders that overall spending is increasing. So if your budget keeps getting cut, it's like, well, we're not going along with US industry trends. But B, to have those larger conversations about the quality of the impact versus the spend that we're putting on. I know another common thing that comes up is L&D professionals fighting for budget. Fighting for investment, fighting for headcount. And actually, we're going to talk about that a little bit towards the end of this presentation, but where do those measurements come in, and how do they come in to effectively tell the story to our leaders that if you don't invest the time, if you don't invest the money or the people, you're going to get garbage in, garbage out skills. And higher turnover, which is going to cost you more money. And you know, when and how do we bring that into the conversation? So thank you both for summarizing that. I did want to get to Colleen's question. Yes, these charts are focused on training overall and classroom training, whether it's virtual or in person. It's more of that formal training as opposed to say informal training. But I see you also have your hand raised. Did you want to make a comment?
Well, you had asked earlier about, you know, whether or not we had any thoughts about why mid-sized companies increased their hours of training. And I've been wondering if companies have increased their hours or their options as a way to retain employees, such as in 2021, the company I was working for, I think it was 2021, following the year of pandemic, when it hit, and then we had layoffs and everything like that. Bringing in a company like Udemy, for instance, or increasing options within Skillsoft, possibly because we did not have an L&D team anymore, or if ever. And
Mhm.
also, like I said, just to keep people, because we're losing people drastically in 2020 and 2021 voluntarily for like better opportunities out there.
Mhm.
I just thought that could be a
Yeah.
possibility. Yes, LinkedIn Learning as an example.
Yes, and my company is an example as well. We opened up access to those online resources in order to kind of fill in for the lack of bandwidth that we had to support our growing organization. So thank you, Colleen, for your comments. And all of this, man, did you guys see my presentation beforehand? Because you're just segueing into my next segment.
One comment.
Yes,
Um,
Bruce.
So in 2017, I was the last Dutch course. I was the last trainer for quite a big company all over the country. And I was doing face-to-face trainings. I was doing 3D trainings. I was doing webinars. I was doing it all.
Mm-hmm.
Since I've left, their trainings went down. And as of this past weekend, when I was back in the Bay Area, I came to find out that the only training most of the people on, we had been acquired by another company. The other company's doing a little bit more training than they used to. But my company that I work for, there is no training except for compliance training. So
The
when they say
mandatory
this
training.
industry, right? So
Mhm.
when it says training for hours, is it including that or not including that? Because that's where
Yeah. Go
just
ahead,
thought
please.
I'd add that. No, I just thought I'd add that.
Yeah, I mean, the assumption is that if they're just showing numbers of pure training hours, it's all formal classroom training. Yeah, leadership training, compliance training, mid-managerial training, all the training. Yes, Jesse?
Just occurred to me, we keep talking about training rather than development and learning. And I think the whole point of ASTD changing to ATD was to get rid of that word training, really, and move into what it's about. I mean, you could train till forever and nobody learns anything. It's useless. So I don't know. It just occurred to me. I just throwing that out. I don't know what to do with it, but the word training maybe isn't terribly useful here.
Yeah, I think that. Jenny, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, Jesse, that's exactly what I was thinking too. Is hours of formal training going down, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing at all. It maybe, hopefully, some places are doing things more informal training and not counting that as training or informal learning. You know, maybe it's, peer, project-based learning, or maybe they're beefing up their enablement and performance support, and that's, helping people get what they need just in time. But do they count that as hours of training? Probably not. Or maybe there's like a mentoring program. They don't count that as training.
Right. Yeah, that thought had actually occurred to me too, Jenny. Chris, what are your thoughts? And then we'll move on.
Here for what Jenny just said, because really, if we understand the outcome, which is talent development, that's what they should be measuring, is the outcome, not the input. Hours of training or just-in-time training or whatever. I mean, Addie says, analyze what the objective is, and evaluation says, did we get there? Implementation says, can we provide a holistic solution to change the task structure, people, systems, rewards, and leadership? And that's what we as, talent development, see, I love that. Talent development, not training people. It's not just the workshop. There's so many other elements of what it is that we can do to provide talent development. Yeah. And it could be under our control. We need other allies. We need strategic planners. We need organization development. We need human resources. We need operations.
Man, you guys really are segueing to my next part. Okay.
And we need C-suite.
And we need
funding it and believing in it.
Yeah. And Jenny, I see your comment about measuring hours of training in and of itself is outdated. Did I hear somebody else?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. There's something I put in. A few people commented, but it's and thank you, Chris, for the reference. I'll look into it. But the other thing that I noticed was that there was a lack of willingness to devote SME time to the instructional designers, which again is about not really valuing or understanding what it takes to do good training programs or to have people really learn what they need to know. And I don't like talent development. I think training is a problem too, but I think talent development makes it sound like we're part of HR and we're not. But anyway,
and for the group, SME, I mean, you probably all know this, but SME is subject matter expert, denoting those people in the other departments who are doing the work and can help us.
Right. And you know, as an instructional designer, if you go in and you have to go with material you don't know that much about, and you need to understand what is it people don't understand. You need to understand what is it that the SMEs know but aren't very good at explaining. And a lot of companies were getting so protective, and these were IT companies, of their SME time. And they were trying to move everything to a spreadsheet where you couldn't even access the SME to get clarity. And you'd ask a question and you'd get the same thing they'd written in the spreadsheet back to you in the email. It was bizarre, crazy. And there's no way you can do quality learning programs, we will use that term, in that way, because you have to understand it well enough to be able to rephrase it so it's easy to understand and structure it. And it was really bizarre. And again, it's about how much is really learning and development, training and development valued by organizations, that they're not willing to devote the subject matter expert time so that you can really do a good program that people are going to learn from.
Yeah. All great comments. And, you know, I think this definitely is going to segue to the next part of the presentation, talking about how L&D professionals are doing. And for this, I turned to the, I have their name right here. Sorry, I'm just pulling up my notes. For this, I turned to the Learning and Performance Institute, LPI. Raise your hand if you've heard of them. Anyone? Maybe? The Learning and Performance Institute?
No.
So they've surveyed thousands of learning and development professionals and asked them basically on a scale of 0 to 4, 0 being no experience and 4 being you're a strategic expert at it. How confident do you feel in the following skill sets? And here is what came up. So from a strengths perspective, it's no surprise that the strongest 5 skills that came up were facilitating face-to-face learning, designing and developing solutions, supporting work teams, creating content, and general project management. Okay, so you're just going to take a look at that. These came up as the top 5, and in no particular order. I don't have a graph that shows the strongest 1 through 5, but these are the top 5 skills. Oh, wait, I have a graph right there. I lied. The graph is right here in terms of how they rated themselves. So it looks like facilitating face-to-face learning. We were like, yes, I am an expert or close to it there. The weakest 5, or the 5 that I should say these L&D professionals said they felt the least confident. Look at this: evaluating impact, marketing and communications, assessing performance, data analytics, managing L&D procurement, and finances. And if we notice, 3 out of the 5 least confident, it doesn't say we can't do it, but this is where we feel the least confident, has to do with evaluating impact. Another part of this study looked at L&D departments and what were the top things that learning and development, talent development departments said they would like to improve upon. And take a look at this. I just want to pause and let you read this list. How does that make you feel? I'd like to hear, there were a couple of voices I haven't heard from yet, forgive me, but I would like to hear from you. But Lenka, I'd like to hear from Remy. How does this make you feel, given everything we just talked about?
I agree. This is an issue that we quite frequently come across when the L&D programs are not perceived as investment, right? They're perceived as an expense for the business. And it's so hard to prove the effectiveness because the results of what we do will not be shown right after the training, right? It's going to be learning on the job, and it will take time. It will translate into retention and things that will be more long-term. So it's really difficult to prove that a particular training was effective or made a difference, other than collecting the feedback, but that's very level one, right, and not necessarily a good measure of whether the training was really effective.
Yeah, what about the rest of you? Given everything we just discussed, Chris, I see your comment in the chat, makes me feel sad for the industry. Typically, I'm hired for a result. Yes, and typically when we're asked to do things, there's always a result or an impact in mind, right? I mean, Chris's point, Addie, we're taught to assess, evaluate. It's the two bookends of what we do, and yet we struggle as a department, as a team, as individuals, we struggle. Now I'm curious, and only answer if you feel comfortable, but in the chat, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 meaning, I struggle with this, I don't feel confident with this at all, and 5 meaning, oh my God, I'm leading the charge, doing everything I can. How strong do you feel you are when it comes to using data to drive your work? Whether you are self-employed, whether you are in an organization, scale of 1 to 5. 1, you hate it, you're struggling with it. 5 meaning, yeah, all day, every day. Only if you feel comfortable. If you prefer not to, that's okay too. Okay. Okay, so somewhere in the middle. You know, some of us not so much, and it's not meant to be a judgment, right? Because of course we all just sat here and said it's important, it's vital, it's needed for us to get money. And Marika, I appreciate your comment. It depends, right? And Carla, you said, I'm sorry, it's not funny, but it is the irony of you were asked to help improve a metric and you couldn't get them to give you data on said metric. I myself go through that challenge. Raise your hand if you've been asked to do a training in order to improve a problem and then you can't get the data you need. Yeah.
Crazy.
Later, I was told it would be too embarrassing. Well, let's talk about culture. And the culture of making mistakes, for sure. All right, I have a few minutes left, and so just going to run through a couple slides about the chapter. If you didn't notice, I intentionally spent a lot of time talking about the industry because it affects all of us. But of course, we here at ATD Golden Gate have some updates for you as well. So I'm just going to quickly go through that. We have some time left over if you want to continue to network, continue to talk. But here's how we did, and wait a minute, hold on. I had updated this slide, sorry. Give me 1 second. Oh, there we go. It's going strong. Then I had a hiccup. Okay, so as a chapter, our membership as of late, is around 88 members, and about 40% of our members are power members. So they are members of the chapter and they are members of ATD National. And of course, this is an ever-changing number. Financial wise, our total revenue in 2022 was around $18,927. And for those of you looking at it going, wow, my God, you're rich. Well, our expenses were about $18,788. And so when we say we are a nonprofit, we mean it. None of the board members, myself, the volunteers, nobody gets a paycheck. We all do this in the midst of jobs and personal life and art shows and trips and vacations. In the back of our mind, we're thinking, how can we help L&D professionals get together? And so this is how we did. So looking back on last year, what we did well, we had diverse amount of programs and forums to help L&D professionals network and get together. Obviously, the networking side, we keep getting feedback that people want more, and we hear you. But last year was very proud that we did the paella parties, which if you were in the North Bay, in the South Bay, or in the East Bay, hopefully you were able to stop by in person. It was the first in-person event since pre-COVID, and we got a lot of great interaction. We expanded our member offerings. So if you haven't seen it, we have a consultants page where if you are a consultant or if you are looking for one, you can go on that page and see that they're all members who are offering their services. We don't get proceeds or any kind of affiliation with that. It's just about connecting people. And we set the groundwork for some new 2023 initiatives. We hosted a bunch of different types of events. This slide is intentionally messy, but everything from, we had a program every month for learning and development. We had a CPTD study group. We had TED discussions, special interest groups. Bruce is here. He did the 3D learning group with Carla. So we were very proud of that. But here are some things we could have done better. Obviously, this list is not all inclusive, but these are just some of the things that came top of mind. We are consistently working on building our volunteer pipeline for future chapter leaders. We also want to be better about engaging you, engaging the members, engaging potential members. You're out here, you're coming to our events. In particular, last year, unfortunately, the ATD East Bay chapter dissolved for multitude of reasons, but we had tried in different ways to engage the chapter and it didn't quite work out, but it just gives us a learning lesson for next year. Of course, we want to do more in-person networking. We want to get together in person, and we want to increase our financial sustainability. I mean, we're glad that we were in the black by like $100, but it's not very sustainable to maintain the chapter ongoing. And so we're working on finding new ways to build our financial cushion. So what happens now? Well, the board of directors and the volunteers that we currently have on the list are meeting. We're going to have a retreat, get together, and deep dive into some of these issues. Operational sustainability, which, you know, AKA volunteers, getting more people, getting more help. Member engagement, AKA getting to know you all, leveraging your feedback more effectively. Programming, bringing people together in better and more effective ways, and our finances, staying in the black, as well as other things. I know I kind of sped through that, but I just want to pause and say any comments or questions? Or in the home stretch here.
I do. Are you planning to do more in-person things then? And the concern is, I think that's great, and yet the reality is people's work schedules are so hectic, the commutes are so horrible. It's really hard to get people to come to a place. So I don't know how I'm completely out of any ideas of how to make that work, and yet I think it's really important.
Yes, so yes, we, knowing all of those factors, we do want to give it a try. More specifically, where we've seen success pre-COVID was when we had regional-based in-person events. So the South Bay, the East Bay, the North Bay. Obviously, we've had different challenges that have affected our ability to do that so far. But we want to give it a try because we are consistently hearing feedback, both in our prior surveys and anecdotally, that people just can't wait to get connected with other people. Lena Mendoza, who is here, is actually reinstating our meetup group. Her first event is January 19th. If you go on Meetup and you look up talent development, sorry? 18th. Sorry. January 18th. And she's planning to do them in the coming months. And so we're going to give it a try and reassess how it goes. And so, yes. Oh, okay. So last thing, if you are interested in helping out with the different workings of the chapter, I'm putting an email in the chat and saying, shoot us a note and just say, hey, don't know necessarily what I could do, but I'd love to help, and reach out, and we would love to hear from you. Of course, we would also just love to see you at these events if that is the bandwidth that you are working with right now. And last but not least, if you are not a member, we do have a one-time discount code where if you go to our website and you join and use the discount code join today, you can join the chapter and get access to discounted prices to our events, get thousands of hours of recorded content. And America, I saw your hand was raised.
Yes, thank you, Kalinga. I was wondering, on the previous slide, you mentioned interested in helping out, and I was wondering if you want to share a little bit here with the whole group about what kind of opportunities are available, or if that's more of a one-on-one discussion.
Yes, I can share with the group. Thank you. So a couple of areas where we are looking for additional help. One is programming. So putting events together like this, whether they are virtual or in person, it takes a village to make it work and organize it. So if you're interested in putting together more events, helping to get people together, we just talked about wanting to do more in person and making it geographically focused. So you can reach out. Also engaging membership. We have lots of data. We talked about analytics. We have lots of data about our members, about their makeup, about their feedback survey, various pieces of data. And we would love to have someone dig into that data and help us focus our efforts based on that data. I know the irony of, I just said we're struggling as L&D professionals, we're struggling as a chapter on this. Jessica can attest. So the third is marketing, actually marketing out to people what we do, leveraging different social media platforms, engaging the larger community, not just our membership. We could use help there as well. Chris, you have your hand up. And Carla, I see your hand as well as Bruce. So I'll ask Chris first, then Carla and Bruce.
For 15, 20 years, the chapter had the community outreach program. And so that's where groups of us as professionals in training provided services to the nonprofit Bay Area in which we could improve and then fill in the blank. So we did that. And I think when I even look at the people who are on this page, Carla, Jenny, Bruce, etc., we all bonded around this idea of providing service to others using our superpower in training and development. And it's just that I needed to retire. I can't do that and manage all the other issues in my life. It's an intense job. I will be happy to donate. All of the work in the instructional design workshop became a model so all of our various volunteers could be on the same track. I'll do that, but I can't lead that anymore. And so if building a purpose for our chapter to contribute to community could be the community outreach program, let me know.
You know what, Chris? I think I put the president at TD Golden Gate email in the chat. I would, if you see it in the chat, I think as a follow-up, I would love to, just hear from you just about what you said exactly. To your point, one of the challenges we have is finding people who have the bandwidth to coordinate and to lead. But I think that your point is valid. And, if you send us a note, at minimum, it starts the conversation of, is that a possibility? Carla?
Yeah, actually, I was going to say something similar. I was going to say, I think Chris, Bruce, and Jenny for sure would agree with me, because I've volunteered through A2D or ASTD, then BAODN, and a couple of other professional associations I've been involved with. In every case, they're rich relationships that develop. There's a lot of learning that you get from just working with other professionals who share those interests, and we all come with different knowledges and we can all learn from each other. And those are lifelong relationships, and they're really important relationships with people. They can sometimes lead to work, or at least rumors of work, but they also just help you in so many ways. I don't think it's hard work, and you have to manage it so it doesn't take over your life and you can handle all the things, but it's very, very rewarding to get involved and do something with. You never know how multifaceted it'll be until you do some of it.
Yeah, well, and Carla, I know for me personally, it helped me get a job. So I'll say that.
Yeah.
I joined ATD because I was in transition and I did not have a resume that showed my value. And so I started volunteering with ATD because I could facilitate workshops. I could help with project and program management. I could help lead other volunteers. And through that, go on my LinkedIn page. A lot of that started at ATD. Bruce.
Well, I'll go off of what Chris said and Carla said, and I can attest to that by just saying one thing. I'm 70 years old and I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm going to be the VP of membership that I had years ago when I lived in the Bay Area. So this is my way of giving back, and I would hate to see, I'll say our chapter, because I am a member, fold like the other chapter did. The other thing that we need is because I know is CFO, that's what's Terry's job. Yeah. We need a new CFO. Terry would like to go into retirement. She's been doing that job, I believe, since I left town. So she's had it for like 6-7 years.
That is a very good point.
So if you know of anyone that would like to experience that, she'd be more than happy to, number one, mentor you so that she can hand the job over to you. Yeah. And she'd still be there at your side if you had any questions. But that is something very crucial that also keeps the chapter running, is the CFO. Yeah. Yes.
Thank
she
you,
feeds
Bruce,
the train.
for mentioning that. Thank you for mentioning that, because she literally has been managing our reporting and our finances for a while. And so if any of you, or if you know someone who loves digging into the numbers, doesn't mind doing a little bit on the side to give back to the community and all of that, let us know. And then Carla, I saw you holding your hand. Yeah.
I'm on the board of a different, so I'm like up to here right now. Otherwise, I'd love to say, Chris, I'll help you if you want to do something, but I'm just like up to here. But the group I'm on, we've been writing our job descriptions as board members, because one of the things that intimidates people is not knowing what they're getting into. Mm-hmm. And having some information about what's involved in doing that job, I think is going to help people go, well, I can do that. So it might be, I know it's time consuming, one more thing, but once you write them, then the next, people can go in and you can keep tweaking them and keep improving them, but get something started so that as members who might want to volunteer, they can go, oh, okay, that's manageable.
And the good news is we have at least some roles that have descriptions. Jesse, you were going to say
they do exist, but they've been tweaked and they're not made public right now, but they're We have them.
We have them.
And
Well, yeah,
need to be looked at. That could be a little group in the retreat, maybe to
Exactly.
focus on, or
exactly.
following the retreat to come back with. But
Yeah.
they do exist. They need to be updated probably, but we don't have to start with a blank page.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you all.
Can I just point out the one thing I threw in? The other thing I need is a social media expert. I am not an expert, and I do publish all our stuff on LinkedIn and Facebook, but nobody sees it. So I
Mhm.
need somebody who's really tuned into all that to take that and go with it and help us attract the world, or at least
Well,
our local world.
We found out the hard way that it takes a lot more than being a millennial, because I'm a millennial and I don't know nothing about
well,
social
that's-
media marketing.
That's better than being whatever I'm a boomer, I guess. But
Yeah. Well, thank
barely.
you. Thank you all. This is a recorded session. The recording will be available on the website. If you are not a member, you will be sent a link so you can have access to this. And have a good rest of your evening. Thank you for joining me on this Thursday evening. I hope it gave you some insights, and I hope you had some great conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
This was excellent, Kalinka.
Thank you,
Very
Chris.
good.
Yeah, extremely engaging.
Thank you.
Really, really a good couple of hours or whatever it was. And nice to see some of you that I've never met before.
Nice to see you all.
Yeah. Take care,
Good night,
everybody.
Chris. Good night, Jenny.
Hi all.
Good night.